TRON wasn't just a movie, it was a digital prophecy. Released in 1982, it dropped audiences into a neon world of computers and light cycles long before the internet, VR, or video games ruled the culture. The movie was both a box office oddity and a cult classic, inspiring tech geeks and filmmakers for decades. But behind the glowing suits and grid battles are some seriously weird facts you probably don't know. Let's dive into 20 weird facts you didn't know about TRON. Back in the early 80s, Disney was in a slump. They weren't the powerhouse we know today. The studio executives thought TRON was way too out there. A movie about computers, programs, and virtual worlds? Too nerdy, too confusing. But director Steven Lisberger pushed hard, convincing them it was a story about man versus machine, a modern myth. Disney reluctantly agreed, though they treated it as a side project. Ironically, the film's visuals and ideas would later influence everything from video games to Pixar. What's extra weird? Disney's brass didn't even believe audiences knew what a computer was back then. Yet they greenlit it. A bold move that proved sometimes studios take risks without realizing they're shaping the future. Before TRON was a movie, it was an animation project inspired by the glow of Pong and early arcade machines. Lisberger saw Pong in the late 70s and became obsessed with capturing that electronic glow. He originally planned TRON as a short animated film, but expanded it into a live-action/animation hybrid after realizing computers could generate wild new visuals. You can see the arcade influence everywhere: the grid, the racing light cycles, even the way characters duress. The design didn't just borrow from games, it inspired games in return. Arcades were flooded with TRON-style imitators after the movie. That full-circle relationship between film and gaming is what makes TRON so special. Without Pong, we might never have gotten those glowing suits or the digitized Jeff Bridges. Here's a wild one. TRON wasn't even nominated for a Best Visual Effects Oscar. Why? Because the Academy ruled that using computers was cheating. Let that sink in. The movie that pioneered CGI got punished for using it. Instead, films with traditional effects like E.T. took the spotlight. The irony? Today, nearly every blockbuster is drenched in CGI, all thanks to the groundwork TRON laid. The Academy's refusal only added to TRON's cult status. Fans still argue it's one of the biggest Oscar snubs ever, so let's hear it. Do you think TRON deserved that visual effects nomination? Drop your hot take in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more deep dives into the films that changed Hollywood's rules. Surprise? Those glowing neon suits? They weren't glowing at all. The actors actually wore black and white spandex outfits with circuit-like designs painted on. The glowing colors were added later through a painstaking process of backlit animation on each frame. It was insanely labor-intensive, requiring thousands of hand-altered frames to get the glowing effect right. The actors, including Jeff Bridges and Bruce Boxleitner, joked that they felt like human chess pieces during filming. The brilliance of the glowing world wasn't high-tech CGI. It was a mix of live-action, rotoscoping, and animation tricks. Even now, that strange analog meets digital glow is one of TRON's most iconic visuals. What's weird is that audiences at the time thought the whole thing was made on computers. In reality, most of it was handmade. Long before Marvel de-aged its actors or video games scanned human faces, Jeff Bridges became one of the first Hollywood stars to be digitized. The filmmakers used a process to scan still images of Bridges and create computer-rendered sequences. At the time, this was revolutionary and a little creepy. Bridges has said it was strange watching his likeness become data decades before that became a normal thing. He joked later that he was the first actor to get uploaded. That experiment paved the way for modern digital doubles, which are now everywhere in blockbusters. TRON may not have gotten the credit it deserved in 1982, but it was quietly inventing the future of filmmaking, and Bridges was the guinea pig. One of TRON's most iconic moments is the light cycle battle. But the computers used to render it were so primitive they almost overheated and crashed during production. Each frame took hours to process, and the animators had to carefully balance memory so the machines wouldn't melt down. The bikes themselves were designed to look sleek and futuristic, but in reality, animators could only move them in straight lines and 90-degree turns. Anything more was too much for the hardware. That limitation actually made the scene better because the rigid turns added to the game feel. The irony? A sequence that now looks retro-futuristic was once the bleeding edge of computer tech. Without it, we wouldn't have the legacy of light cycles showing up in games, comics, and the TRON Legacy sequel decades later. All that stress on 1980s computers ended up being worth it. Cindy Morgan, who played both Laura and her digital counterpart Yori, admitted that the costumes were uncomfortable and downright embarrassing. The tight black and white spandex left little to the imagination, and the actors had to perform under hot lights for hours. Morgan said she almost walked off the set because she felt ridiculous. But once she saw the finished footage with the glowing effects added, she realized how groundbreaking it looked. What's funny is that the cast didn't even know what the final movie would look like. They were acting in a white soundstage with almost no set pieces. For months, Morgan wasn't convinced anyone would even see the movie. Instead, her glowing suit became iconic, and Yori remains a cult favorite character. It's a weird reminder that some of the coolest sci-fi moments in history started with actors feeling like they were just wearing pajamas on camera. In TRON, Jeff Bridges' character, Kevin Flynn, is a hacker who sneaks into Encom's mainframe to expose corporate theft. Back in 1982, the concept of hacking was barely known outside of a few tech circles. Computers were giant, clunky machines, and the internet as we know it didn't exist. Yet, Tron was already talking about the dangers of corporations controlling information, the risks of digital theft, and the idea of programs rebelling against their users. Decades later, those themes feel eerily prophetic. In fact, early hackers loved Tron, claiming it was the first film that made their subculture look cool instead of criminal. Flynn's battle against Encom foreshadowed cyberpunk storytelling that would dominate the late 80s and 90s. What seemed like wild sci-fi back then is basically reality now, except no one's flying light cycles around Google's server rooms. Yet. Here's the weirdest twist. Tron wasn't a huge hit at the box office. It made about $50 million worldwide, which was decent, but not game-changing. The real cash cow, the Tron arcade game. Released by Bally Midway in 1982, it became one of the decade's best-selling cabinets, raking in over $30 million in quarters in its first year alone. Kids lined up in arcades to play the glowing light cycle levels, the tank battles, and the MCP cone fight. For many, the game was their first real introduction to TRON. The irony is that the movie inspired a game, and the game kept the movie alive in pop culture long after it left theaters. Without the arcade hit, Tron might have been forgotten. Instead, it became the rare case where the tie-in merchandise was more successful than the movie itself. So here's a question. Have you ever played the Tron arcade game? Drop your answer below, and don't forget to smash that like button if you'd love to see more retro gaming stories here. Most films in 1982 were shot on standard 35mm film, but Lisberger insisted on shooting TRON in 70mm to maximize sharpness and brightness for the glowing effects. That choice made the colors pop and gave the computer world a surreal, hyper-real look. But it also made production harder, since 70mm cameras were bulky and expensive. Disney wasn't thrilled about the added cost, but the end result was worth it. The crisp visuals helped Tron stand out, even against heavyweights like Blade Runner and E.T. that released the same year. Fun fact, when Tron was re-released in IMAX in the 2000s, the 70mm source actually made the transfer look incredible compared to other films of its time. So, while it might not have been a box office titan in '82, visually it was playing in a league of its own. When Tron was in production, Disney executives were nervous. The studio was struggling in the early '80s, and they weren't sure audiences would buy into a movie about computers. Some even thought it was too nerdy for mainstream success. At one point, executives debated canceling the release altogether, worried it would flop. Thankfully, the film's test screenings went well enough to convince them to move forward. Still, Disney treated Tron cautiously, marketing it more as a children's fantasy than the sci-fi revolution it was. That hesitation may have hurt its initial box office, but it also gave Tron an underdog status that fans embraced. Looking back, it's crazy to think the same studio that now dominates sci-fi and superhero films nearly buried one of the most forward-thinking projects of its time. Without Tron, Disney's relationship with tech-savvy audiences might look very different today. To give the computer world an authentic vibe, the filmmakers hired actual programmers and computer engineers as extras. Many of the background programs you see in the grid were people who actually spent their real lives coding and working with early computers. They weren't professional actors, but their awkward movements and slightly stiff performances actually fit perfectly into the digital landscape. It gave the world of TRON a subtle authenticity, like these really were people-turned-programs learning how to move in cyberspace. Some of those programmers later admitted they had no idea how big a deal the film would become, but they loved being part of history. It's one of those details that makes Tron stand out. When the background crowd actually feels like they belong in the world, it sells the illusion. Who knew Silicon Valley nerds moonlighting as actors would add so much to a Disney movie? Jeff Bridges brought his laid-back surfer dude energy to Kevin Flynn. But here's a funny detail. During filming, he often wore sneakers with his spandex suit. Since the glowing costume effects were added later, the crew figured no one would notice. His shoes. Sure enough, in several scenes, if you freeze frame, you can spot him rocking comfy kicks instead of futuristic boots. Bridges later laughed about it, saying the costumes were so uncomfortable that he needed at least his feet to feel normal. In a way, it kind of works. Flynn was the outsider in the computer world, so him being a little more casual fits the character. Fans who spot the sneakers now treat it like a secret Easter egg. Considering all the high-tech wizardry on display, it's hilarious that one of the most human details came from an actor just wanting to save his feet. The villain of Tron, the Master Control Program, wasn't just a generic bad guy. He was modeled after fears of growing corporate monopolies in the late 70s and early 80s. Disney and director Steven Lisberger wanted him to embody the idea of a corporation controlling too much data and power. Sound familiar? Decades later, people often compare the MCP to modern tech giants, like Google, Amazon, or Facebook. It's another way Tron ended up predicting the future. The MCP's design, a giant, rotating cone of light, was meant to feel both alien and bureaucratic, like a faceless machine controlling your life. So here's a question for you. Do you think today's tech CEOs are basically real-life master control programs? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you think Tron nailed the future, and subscribe for more deep-dive movie history. Even in a futuristic digital world, Disney couldn't resist sneaking in a little magic. During the light cycle sequence, if you look closely at one of the overhead shots, you can spot a hidden Mickey Mouse silhouette formed by the trails of the bikes. Animators added it as a playful Easter egg, knowing sharp-eyed fans might catch it. This tiny nod to Disney tradition has become one of the most famous hidden Mickeys in movie history. For a film about computers and cyberspace, the image of Mickey Mouse popping up feels like a reminder that no matter how futuristic things get, Disney's classic identity is never far away. It's a detail so small you might miss it, but for fans, it's proof that Tron wasn't just about breaking new ground. It was still a Disney movie at heart. Actress Cindy Morgan played both Laura, Flynn's co-worker in the real world, and Yori, her digital counterpart in the computer world. It wasn't unusual for actors in TRON to double up like this, but Morgan leaned into the idea that humans and programs were reflections of each other. Fun fact, she nearly didn't get the role because Disney execs worried the skin-tight glowing costumes might look too risque for audiences at the time. Morgan later revealed that filming in the costumes was grueling. They were hot, itchy, and didn't allow for much movement. Still, her dual performance helped give the film emotional weight, showing that the cold world of computers could still hold warmth and connection. Yori wasn't just a digital figure, she was a symbol of loyalty and friendship. Without Morgan's performances, Tron might have felt like all dazzle and no heart. Not everyone was happy about Tron's glowing grids. In the mid-1980s, Lisberger and Disney were hit with lawsuits from companies claiming the film ripped off their computer concepts and designs. One particularly strange claim argued that Tron copied elements from a role-playing game called Adventures of Tron. Most of the cases fizzled out, but it showed how ahead of its time the movie was. The idea of virtual worlds was so new that people weren't even sure who owned it yet. Ironically, decades later, Tron became the symbol of digital originality, inspiring countless games, comics, and even other lawsuits when people tried to imitate its neon style. Back in '82, it wasn't just pioneering tech, it was pioneering legal headaches. Before Wendy Carlos was hired to create Tron's groundbreaking electronic score, Disney briefly toyed with the idea of bringing in a rock band to give the film youth appeal. Rumors floated around that groups like Journey or even Pink Floyd were considered for the soundtrack. Journey eventually did contribute to the TRON arcade game, but Carlos got the final call for the film itself. Her mix of orchestral music and synthesizers gave Tron its eerie, futuristic vibe. Imagine the grid with guitars shredding in the background. It could have been a totally different movie. Thankfully, Carlos's experimental sound made Tron feel alien and timeless instead of dated to the '80s rock scene. When Tron hit theaters, Silicon Valley wasn't the giant it is today. But early computer programmers and engineers loved it. Many later claimed it directly inspired them to pursue careers in computing, AI, and gaming. John Lasseter at Pixar even admitted TRON changed how he thought about animation, planting the seeds for Pixar's style. Engineers at Apple and Microsoft were fans too, seeing it as validation that computers could be cool. Tron may have been a box office underdog, but in the world of tech, it was like a manifesto. Without Tron, some of the very tools we use today, 3D animation, virtual reality, even sleek UI design, might have arrived much later. Here's a wild one. Disney originally planned to spin Tron into a trilogy if it performed well. Early outlines for a direct sequel, sometimes referred to as Tron. The next day included more time in the grid, darker program overlords, and even a bigger role for Yori. But after the first film underperformed, Disney shelved the sequels. It took nearly 30 years for Tron Legacy to finally revive the franchise in 2010. What's weird is that if Tron had been a hit in '82, we might have had a full trilogy long before Star Wars finished its first. Instead, Tron became the franchise that took decades to reboot. Conclusion. And there you have it, 20 weird, wild facts about Tron. Back in 1982, it was a risky bet, a movie about computers when most people didn't even own one. Disney almost buried it, critics didn't quite get it, and the Academy thought computers were cheating. But decades later, Tron isn't just remembered, it's revered. It inspired generations of gamers, animators, and tech pioneers. Without it, maybe Pixar doesn't exist, maybe VR looks different, maybe the idea of a digital frontier never takes root in pop culture. That's the magic of Tron. It wasn't just a movie, it was a glimpse of tomorrow. So now it's your turn. What's your favorite part of Tron? The light cycles? Jeff Bridges as Flynn? Or maybe just the fact Disney took such a wild gamble? Drop it in the comments, smash that like button, and don't Derez before subscribing, because we've got plenty more deep dives into the cult classics that shaped Hollywood.